Welcome one and all to this Food Power Winter Welfare webinar. I am Cecily Spelling and I'm the Food Power Comms and Events Coordinator at Sustain, whilst Maggie is on maternity leave. And I think I'm going to start with some housekeeping. So just as we've got a bit of, well, I'm sure everyone's familiar with this already because we've all been using Zoom for 8 months now, the fun. But if everyone can mute themselves whilst they're not talking to avoid background noise, that would be appreciated. A word of warning that this webinar is being recorded, so I hope that's okay. Just for anyone that can't attend, we can put it on YouTube and people can watch it back in their own time. And we are also going to make sure that we use the chat box. So if everyone can just make sure that they can hear me and utilize the chat box to say hello, introduce yourself, you know, talk about what you had for breakfast, because, you know, that's the thrilling stuff like that, just so we can kind of create that kind of atmosphere that we would have if we were in a face-to-face meeting. So yeah, please do say hello. I'm going to start by saying that I had advent calendar chocolate for breakfast with some other stuff, but that was how I started my day and it was joyful. So yeah, I think we've still got a few people joining in, but now with the housekeeping done, with time of the essence, I'll just run through the agenda. So first things first, I'd like to say that Food Power is primarily funded by the National Lottery Community Fund, and we're very grateful for their ongoing support that has made this webinar possible. So thank you very much to them. And the agenda today will focus on a talk from Toby from the Children's Society, who will be running through what he knows about the winter welfare support. We'll also be hearing from Simon, the Food Power Programme Manager, who will update us briefly on the situation, and we'll then dedicate the rest of the session to discussion amongst yourselves by moving into 4 separate breakout rooms. So given the difference across the nations and the time we have available, this session is not necessarily meant to be a kind of everything you will ever be able to know about the different welfare support around the UK, but more just an overview of what we think we know and how it might be implemented in different local authorities, and how it is relevant across the 4 nations and what the different 4 nations are up to. So we do have a very English heavy audience today. So the slides and conversations will be tipped a bit more towards England, but we will definitely be covering some of the support in other nations, also as examples of what could be done in England too. So yes, sorry about that to any devolved friends that have joined the call, but it's the way the cookie is crumbled in this occasion. So I will keep an eye on the chat while Toby and Simon speak. So please feel free to enter questions in there as we go along and they can pick them up, or I'll summarize them for the speakers so they don't have to kind of spot them as they go through, because that is not always a fun task. There's so much going on. But yeah, if anyone has any burning questions, please put them in the chat now. But apart from that, remembering to keep yourselves muted while everyone else is talking, I'm going to hand over to Toby, if that's okay, Toby.
Of course. Can I just check that you can hear me all right?
I can hear you properly.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for having me this morning. My name's Toby North. I'm a Senior Public Affairs Officer at the Children's Society, and in that capacity, I lead our public affairs and policy work with local and devolved government in England. So I'm going to talk a little bit this morning about kind of local welfare assistance and some of the work we've been doing over a number of years, and indeed more intensively over the past few months on that topic. So we've been conducting research and advocacy on the topic of emergency financial support for a number of years. And the reason why we as an organisation are interested in that is because we know that even a short-term financial crisis can have a profound impact on children and young people living in a household experiencing it. Alongside the immediate financial strain and practical struggles, which I'm sure you'll all be well aware of finding and applying for help during a crisis, our past work has highlighted the long-term impacts on children's well-being and emotional well-being. So we have a commitment to developing, both through our kind of policy, practical and campaigning work, better systems of emergency support across England. So we're kind of, from a practical point of view, we're piloting a new approach through our coordinated community support programme in 4 local authorities across England to develop better local networks of emergency support, and that is kind of geared specifically around integrating local welfare assistance schemes run by local authorities, and in the case of Wales, the Discretionary Assistance Fund, with local voluntary sector provision to ensure that there really is a kind of comprehensive network of support rather than kind of piecemeal help on offer to those experiencing financial crisis. So many of you, I'm sure, will be aware, local welfare assistance schemes were established by many local authorities in England from 2013 after the old crisis loan and community care elements of the discretionary social fund were devolved. The type of support which these schemes deliver varies widely. Some provide cash grants, low-cost loans, zero-interest loans. Some offer a more restricted level of support, such as just through food, fuel, or in-kind vouchers, and others focus on that much more that community care element. So providing essential items such as furniture and white goods, perhaps for people who are finding themselves in accommodation for the first time. And ideally, these schemes would provide the kind of immediate support needed to overcome a crisis, and for whom the national social security system wouldn't be able to meet needs quickly enough. And we believe fundamentally that if properly resourced, local authorities are really well placed to deliver this type of support. They can use the knowledge that they have of need in their communities, strong working relationships with the voluntary and community sector, and provide the immediate support needed in the case of a crisis. But for us, crucially, they can also link into a wider network of support and other services such as debt advice and welfare maximisation services to address and hopefully prevent reoccurring crisis and address some of those underlying causes. So that's kind of talking about local welfare assistance in its ideal form. The issue was that when responsibility for crisis support was initially passed to local government in England, it was accompanied by dedicated funding, but this stopped in 2015. So with reduced funding for councils overall over the past decade, lack of guidance from government, and the absence of any statutory requirement for local authorities to deliver this type of support, local welfare assistance has been massively eroded over the past decade. Our research found that 1 in 7 local authorities no longer have a scheme in place at all, and many more have scaled back the level of support on offer. So some of the issues that we've seen coinciding with that scaling back of support is our very restrictive eligibility criteria, very onerous application processes, low awareness of schemes within local areas, both from individuals who directly might want to access that support and also kind of voluntary sector partners, such as food banks and other emergency support providers. And then some really negative practices around kind of suppressing demand, treating local welfare assistance scheme as the support of last resort rather than the first port of call for people facing financial crisis, and some really negative features such as schemes requiring people to have exhausted all available routes, including asking their family and friends for loans or even reverting to commercial credit in order to overcome that immediate financial crisis. I should say there are some really outstanding examples of good practice, but sadly that is the minority rather than the kind of prevailing situation across England. But the kind of good news is that over the past few months, since the onset of the pandemic, a lot of local welfare assistance schemes have kind of adapted to meet hugely increased demand. We've seen some excellent examples of practice where councils have seen they've seen the value of delivering this kind of support. They've begun promoting it rather than treating it as a support of last resort. Many have relaxed eligibility criteria, increased the size of awards made of support, and simplified the application processes to make it much easier for those in need to access support through LWAs. And even earlier in the year, before no additional funding had been made available from government, councils increased budgets and redeployed staff to help process applications. But kind of over the course of the past few months, we've seen additional funding from central government, first through the DEFRA administered local authority emergency assistance grant for food and other essential items. And subsequently now, which I think is the main topic of discussion today, the DWP COVID Winter Grant Scheme. And, you know, I think the scale of this funding, whilst it's been delivered in a piecemeal fashion, the scale of this funding has the potential to vastly increase the capacity of local authorities to deliver this type of support. Our research found that in the year 2018-19, local authorities spent just over 40 million in total across the year on local welfare assistance. Compare that to the 170 million pounds of funding which has been provided by DWP to go through from December to March. We believe that this represents a real opportunity to rebuild the capacity of local authorities to deliver this support across England, and that's what we're working to ensure happens. So our focus is on ensuring that that funding is spent effectively to support those in the greatest need, but also in such a way that it builds the capacities of local authorities to deliver this type of support, as well as the case for them to do so in the long term. And first and foremost, we believe that the funding should be spent to strengthen council-run local welfare assistance schemes, or when those schemes currently don't exist, establish one, even if that's on a temporary basis. And really re-establish local authorities as the first point of call for residents facing financial crisis.
Toby, the slides aren't changing. We have put it in the chat, but we've just got your first slide. So I'm not sure if you're changing the slides or not, Toby, sorry.
I think Simon is in charge of the slides.
But we're just viewing the same first slide. So we've had no change in the slide.
Apologies, I don't have kind of a full deck. I don't know what's...
Don't worry, Toby. I think it's just that they're Simon's slides and that's kind of relevant to you, but you're talking without the slides. So don't worry about the slides changing, or they're not going to until Simon talks. So just listen to Toby's wise words for now.
Thank you. And I think I was just about wrapping up. So really our focus for the COVID Winter Grant is that it should be spent to strengthen council-run local welfare assistance schemes, with councils acting as the first port of call for residents facing financial crisis. But of course, in the longer term, we, along with other organisations, believe that there should be kind of dedicated funding, guidance and a minimum standard of provision for local welfare assistance, accompanied by at least £250 million per year of funding in the long term for councils to deliver this type of support. But yeah, without any further ado, I'll hand over for questions or comments, or back to Simon, whichever works best.
Thanks very much, Toby. Yeah, Simon, over to you.
Thank you very much. So can people just confirm in the chat that they can see me moving between the slide that has existing support to schemes for this winter? And Cecily, if you can just tell me if that is working from what people are saying in the chat. Excellent, good. Okay, so yeah, Toby transitioned into the COVID Winter Welfare Scheme. As he said, a large amount of money has been made available for England by DWP. So it's 170 million to be spent from today until the end of March 2021. It's important that people understand that there's if you concentrate, you get it, but it sounds a little bit complicated at first. But 80% of that 170 million has to be spent on supporting families with children. That's a sort of condition from DWP. So that's 136 million pounds across England has to be spent like that. So it means that councils are going to have to allocate whether the spend is for children with families with children, or for other households without children. That'd be the remaining 20%. But then there's also another condition from DWP where 80% of that 170 million, so the same amount, 136 million, must be spent on support related to food, energy and water bills, and another and then the remaining 20% can be spent on other expenditure, like those things listed there as the examples DWP give. So it means that councils are going to have to double record in terms of, has this money been spent on children and families, and has it been spent on food, energy and water, or the other costs? So that there's some sort of back office administration that councils are going to have to do to make sure they spend the money as DWP intends for it to be spent. And I think it is really important that people know that this funding isn't available to be spent on rent or housing costs. And what I've done to these next few slides about the English scheme is just put in brackets which page of the guidance for the fund that I'm referring to. So those two things I've just mentioned are on page 4. So really what I'm trying to do with these slides is just give people a bit of a heads up about what's in the guidance, so that some decisions have been made already about how this funding is being spent, but some decisions are still being made. And also, as the scheme operates over the next 4 months, I think it's really important that people are vigilant about what the money can and can't be spent on, and how we can make sure it goes to people that need it and in the way that works for them. So councils are the beneficiaries of this funding primarily, so that's county councils and unitary authorities, not district councils, but councils are allowed to partner with district councils, schools, registered charities, food banks, care providers, GPs and others. Those are the examples listed in the guidance, and they do have the flexibility to administer the money in different ways. The guidance does allow for direct cash payments to people, vouchers, provision of food, or funding through third-party organisations. The guidance does communicate this sort of preference from DWP for vouchers over cash, because they say that reduces the risk of fraud. But I think it's really important that we all know that's not compulsory. So if a council were to say that they weren't allowed to give direct cash payments to people, that's just not correct. And as Toby's mentioned, really importantly, the money can be used to support local welfare assistance schemes, hardship funds, discretionary funds, but I guess within the caveat of what the money can be spent on, as I mentioned in the slide before. Then just a few points about eligibility. The guidance is clear that people can be supported multiple times, which is obviously really important given that it's a fund that lasts over the next 4 months and people's situations are going to fluctuate. There's a line about free school meal support. So it's basically, as I and others understand it, it means that councils shouldn't be using the funding to duplicate free school meal provision for children who are eligible for free school meals, but they are allowed to provide other support to children that are eligible for free school meals. So it's just about avoiding duplication of free school meals. So that could be cash support, but I guess it's also thinking about holiday provision that could be provided this Christmas holidays as well. Children of all ages can be supported, including pre-age children, preschool age children, and one important point there is that children and some young people who are up to 25 may have a disability or care leaving status. They are treated as adults under this guidance, so they can't be. Sometimes they would fall under child spend, but that's not the case with this spend. Then there's an important section about immigration status. So councils are allowed to support individuals regardless of their immigration status, including people with no recourse to public funds. But the guidance is clear that there has to be a genuine care need that isn't just about destitution. So they might have identified community care needs, serious health problems, or there might be a risk to a child's well-being. So this is quite a significant restriction on how that money can be spent. So it's by no means perfect, but it does allow for support to be provided to people regardless of their immigration status. So it is really important that councils do use that power, because we know that many of those families and individuals will be in very severe need. I don't think people would necessarily assume this, but just in case, it's important that people know that the funding can't be spent to pay for advice. That can happen alongside the support, of course, but it's really important that the funding, it's really important for DWP that the funding is sort of given to people rather than used to support services. And I guess just in terms of eligibility, I know that councils have been looking at the different groups that may be eligible and thinking about the different ways to reach them. So that's children eligible for early years pupil premium, those who have childcare places funded, those who are eligible for free school meals, as I've already mentioned, those eligible for a 16+ bursary. So there are obviously different ways that people can be categorised and grouped up, but I've seen some examples of how councils are trying to think systematically about the different groups who are most likely to need this support. So the guidance is available on the government website, along with every council in England's allocation. So I'd advise you to have a look at that. The guidance isn't always super clear, I think, at times, which is slightly unhelpful, but it does have quite a helpful FAQs bit towards the end that does answer some of the things that I was unsure about when I'd first read the guidance. So that's the scheme for England, and as Cecily said at the beginning, it's just not possible for me, partly due to my own knowledge and expertise, but also in terms of the time we have today to give a comprehensive guide of what's going on in the nations this winter. But I do think it's important that people in England too are aware of what is happening in other parts of the UK, partly because it serves as examples of what is possible. So in Northern Ireland, the executive recently announced direct cash payments for families who are in receipt of free school meals during these school holidays, and that's a commitment that they've made until Easter 2022. So hopefully well beyond this COVID period, and perhaps an indicator of a longer term commitment to supporting those families during the school holidays. In Scotland, there's been additional financial insecurity funding provided until next Easter. There's a self-isolation grant, and the Scottish Government are bringing in a Scottish child payment. Here's an extra £10 per week for every child under £6 who's eligible. Unfortunately, the payment isn't available until February, but the Scottish Government has opened up applications now, so they're really encouraging people to register for that payment so that they can get it from the 15th of February. And in Wales, we've got a commitment to cash payments to families in receipt of free school meals during the school holidays, up to and including next Easter. And the Welsh Government just published an income maximisation action plan that covers quite a lot of the actions they've taken to date, and some they have planned for the rest of this period. So apologies, that is very much a partial picture, but it was just to give a bit of a taste of what's happening around the country. Then I just wanted to spend my last slide now thinking just about some of the different ways that cash payments are being provided to people and could be provided to people through the support available this winter. So we know that authorities around the UK have used direct bank transfers to just pay money into people's bank accounts, PayPoint or other comparable systems where people can get cash from a registered PayPoint point in, say, a local newsagent or shop. Some areas have used parent pay to reverse payments. So normally parents might pay into a system. Actually, you can reverse the payment so that public services can pay back into parents' accounts. And obviously, shopping vouchers have been used in all sorts of ways, both national schemes led by governments or commissioned by governments, as well as local schemes. And I think on that point, it's really important that the issues areas and people have had with the national schemes means that it has been important for some councils and other areas to opt out of national schemes because they haven't worked so well in terms of where the vouchers can be spent and the sort of administration around them. So Cecily had a quick look just in the last few days around, just to gather some examples of what councils in England are doing, particularly around the winter welfare grant and also some other funding they've had in. But it just showed the diversity of examples of how a cash first approach can be delivered. So in North East Lincolnshire, there's direct financial support being paid into people's bank accounts or through intermediary partners. In North Yorkshire, it's a supermarket voucher is the sort of main system they're using. Again, in Norfolk, food vouchers, and in Essex, vouchers and using the hardship fund. And those are just some examples that they have. All those councils have a sort of comprehensive explanation of the different ways they're using the funding, but those were the ones I wanted to pull out in relation to cash first payments. And I think it's really important to talk about IFAN's Cash First project here as well, which has done some really interesting work, in particular in Scotland, supporting independent food banks to give out food vouchers rather than food itself. And I do think, just harking back to that DWP point about whether vouchers are more likely to avoid fraud or not than cash payments. Also, the point has been raised that obviously financial abuse and other kinds of abuse can be linked to control of a bank account. So there is a case to use vouchers, particularly in those cases where it's important for the right person to have access to the support. So what we wanted to do now was to move into breakouts, and we asked you to register by your region or nation, and Cecily's grouped you together to try and make sure that people who may be in the same area or at least bordering areas can have some conversations now about what you've heard today. If you have any questions for myself, Toby, or indeed anyone else, and also ideas you have for how you might make sure the support reaches the right people in your area, and particularly how we can ensure there's a cash first approach in local areas. So what we've got in the breakouts, we've got myself, Toby, Sabine from the Independent Food Aid Network, Lucy, who is from the Northwest and is one of our peer mentors for Food Power. We're going to be in one of the groups each, but there are also some other sustained staff dotted around. And we'll just gently guide you through those conversations, and then we'll come back and use Mentimeter to just provide some feedback, collect questions. It might be possible for Toby or I or others to respond to some of those questions, but it might be that we have to respond to some of them afterwards, and indeed ask DWP if there are some things that we're not clear about ourselves. And I expect discussions will focus on the winter grant, but there is one group obviously where we've got colleagues, attendees from Scotland and Wales in there, so that might bleed into other discussions, which is of course totally fine. But also, while there is this grant for this winter, as we've seen in those councils that Cecily looked at, actually councils are obviously pooling different funding pots to make things work this winter, so we don't have to just talk about the winter welfare grant, but I think it is a very live discussion at the moment. So I think if that's okay, Cecily, we can go into breakouts now, I guess for 20 minutes perhaps, if that's possible. But
I think we should have everyone back now. So now I'm going to hand over to Simon, who's going to be doing, is Simon here?
Yep.
You are here. I'm going to hand over to Simon, who's going to be doing a kind of Mentimeter virtual space where you can share your thoughts and some of your discussion from that breakout group. So Simon, over to you.
Thank you very much. We had a really useful discussion with some very specific points I think we can pick up on and try and do our best to share information and perhaps get some clarification on. But yeah, I wanted people really to just be able to share from the different groups any key points, any information, any questions from your discussion. So it doesn't matter, you know, don't worry about it all making sense together. So what you do is you either open a new tab on your browser, or you can do this on your smartphone if you have one, and you type in menti.com and then use that code 6369300, and then you should be able to type in some thoughts. So I don't know if Cecily, you're able to do a quick test. Sorry.
No, yeah, I'm on it. So far, so good.
If anyone's having difficulty, shout, but I appreciate it does take a while for the comments to come through on the screen if people are typing.
By faith, yeah, it works for me.
Oh yes, here we are. So while people are typing in their answers, a clear point that came through from our discussion group was about what we started referring to as the 20%, but these people who aren't families with children, perhaps it's certainly what I picked up and what others have picked up is that decisions hadn't really been made about how to best support those groups still. And so I think there's a bit of work perhaps for us and others to do to make sure that to help people, to help share information, make the best choices about how the support is spent for the 20%. There are lots of people championing the support for children and families, which is obviously very important, but there was a slight concern actually that the 20% might be looked over, and and sort of really clarifying what the needs of that group are, perhaps who, you know, may be very isolated, may have caring needs, may be experiencing severe mental health difficulties. So a case to be made there, and I think that's something that Food Power can certainly champion. So let me have a look at what's coming through. So there have been examples of councils saying they couldn't do the cash first approach, so it's good if we've helped people sort of be able to challenge that. It certainly came up in my group as well, but this issue of coordination and avoiding duplication and avoiding a postcode lottery as well. So this sort of ongoing challenge around clear communication and coordination, which we know in a lot of areas has improved during COVID, but there's always room for improvement there, we know. Oh yes, a point came through in our group. I don't know if this is one from that, but yeah, about parish councils, neighbourhood groups, good neighbours, particularly in terms of reaching people in rural communities, obviously. And I must admit, parish councils aren't someone that I would automatically think of as an ally, and I'm from a village, so my dad was on the parish council, so it is people like him that actually can be people that can be identified across a rural area and be champions, and also hopefully tackle some of the potential stigma and barriers, particularly from people who've not had to access this kind of support until now. And I think there is, while this challenge of, while this money does need to get into people's pockets in some form, there is an opportunity to use the funding and the support around it to build capacity for a better response in the longer term as well. So even though we're still in the crisis period, I think that is a good point for us to bear in mind. Do keep going with, oh, here we are. Linking in with credit unions as well. And yeah, providing the other mix of fuel, food, white goods support.
Tina in the chat box has flagged the lack
Right.
of consultation from councils and the use of DEFRA money being dictated with no consultations as well.
Sure, yeah. I think, yeah, we have had a situation where decisions are being made at speed and people, often with good intentions, but if things are done in a rush, it's, while it's important to get support to people quickly, it's not always the best way to be making really important decisions. So I think we'll stop there, but you can carry on putting in any thoughts via Mentimeter or through the chat as well. I think, yes, there are some actions that I think we can pick up, and also we will email everybody with the recording and with some those examples that Cecily had found, but perhaps we'll take a moment to find a few others, or if you can also send in through the chat or on email examples that your council have put into the public domain about how money is being spent in your area. And we'll have the recording made available as well, so that others will be able to listen to it. So thank you very much, and thank you to Toby for speaking, to Lucy and Sabine for facilitating, and also Sabine for sort of helping us and encouraging us to run this session, actually, even though it felt like I was caught in a bit of a panic, but I think it is just important to connect people and try and figure these things out together where we can. Cecily, I'll just hand back to you. I don't know if you want to emphasize the other upcoming webinar.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Perfect. Thanks so much, Simon. Thanks to you for also going through all of the guidance and putting the presentation slides together. No doubt that people found that really useful. So yeah, please do keep in touch with us about how you find it working with your councils, because we would welcome case studies to share of kind of best practice or worst practice if need be, things to avoid. So yeah, do keep in touch. And we do have a webinar next Tuesday as well on maintaining personal resilience in amongst the COVID-19 pandemic. It's just a chance for people to take stock and kind of focus on themselves, because this year has been a challenge to say the least, and I'm sure that many of you are feeling fatigued and exhausted. So hopefully next week's webinar will have a bit of provide a bit of an opportunity for you to take stock. and be given some tools to help build your resilience and kind of, you know, provide some inner strength perhaps. And we've got a chap called Peter Leffort coming along to talk about the resilience tree as part of that. So yeah, please do join. It's Tuesday the 8th at 2 to 3 in the afternoon. So I can put the link in the chat box, or someone can put the link in the chat box, or we'll send it around in an email afterwards. But for now, we're at 10:59, so we've done very well on timing. Bravo. But we'll leave you to enjoy the rest of your days, hopefully. So thank you so much. Keep in touch, and au revoir.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.